There is a particular brightness to a great city in the last week before Christmas, and it is made almost wholly of giving. The shops burned late into the dark with lamps and holly, and the doors of the fine houses stood opening and shutting all day upon the passing in of parcels. Everywhere there was some small ceremony of it. A coin pressed into a crossing sweeper's red hand. A goose carried home by a boy, too pleased to feel the cold. And after every gift there came the same soft music, the whole sweet wage of the giving. Thank you, thank you. How very good of you. A city keeps its Christmas upon gratitude, the way a mill keeps its turning upon water, and the gratitude runs always toward the hand that is seen to give. It does not run toward the hand that gives in the dark. It does not run toward the one who has given past the point of her own comfort, given the last warm thing she owned, given what can never be got back, and then stood apart in the cold and watched the thanks settle warm upon somebody else. There is no carol for that giver. The season keeps no music at all for the gift that is not seen. In that bright and grateful city, there was a young woman about to be taught the whole of that hard lesson across a year and 2 winters, though she did not yet know the first word of it. She stood at the window of a narrow room above a chandler's shop, her one candle left unlit to spare it, turning the little money over in her palm and thinking what she might give and whether it would ever be enough. Her name was Narissa Fenmore, and 2 winters before, she had been a gentleman's daughter with a whole ordinary future in front of her. Now she owned a borrowed black gown gone gray at the seams, a letter of character that no one ever read to the end, and a name that could empty the warmth from a room as quickly as a cry of fire. She had spent the short daylight of that whole week walking house to house after any honest place a reduced gentlewoman might fill, a companion to a difficult lady, a governess, a reader to some old person whose eyes had failed. She had learned to give her name last of all, at the very door, for she had seen too often what it did when she gave it first. There was a moment, always the same moment, when the face across the threshold was still warm from her quiet voice and the plain good sense of her letter. Then she said Fenmore, and watched the warmth go out of that face like a wick pinched between 2 fingers. She stood now on the step of the last house upon her list, a tall house in a square whose railings were hung with holly, and waited while a housekeeper turned the letter over and did not hand it back. Narissa kept her chin level and her cold hand still. A woman who has lost her place in the world is left holding very little, but she may still keep the manner in which she stands in a shut doorway, and Narissa had decided long before that she would keep that if she kept nothing else. She did not beg. She had learned that begging only makes the closing of a door easier for the one who closes it, since it lets them believe they have turned away a beggar and not a lady. The housekeeper reached the name at the foot of the letter and read it, and her mouth drew in. She folded the paper along its creases and passed it back through the narrow gap she had kept in the door. "We have no place here," she said. And then, lower, not unkindly, which was somehow far worse, "You will find none under that name anywhere in this city. My dear, I would not wear out good shoe leather in the trying." The door came to. The holly shivered once and was still. The name had not always been a stone about her neck. There had been a time, not a distant one, when to say Fenmore in the right company was to be answered with a nod of real respect, for her father, Ambrose Fenmore, had been an engraver of such fine and exact work that banks and great houses sent him their seals and their plates and the delicate things no common craftsman could be trusted with. He had raised his daughter at the workbench as another man might raise a son to the land, teaching her the burin and the copper and the reading of a line. She had loved it, the sharp smell of the ink, the slow growing of a whole picture out of a bare plate under one patient hand. It was that very exactness that destroyed him. A great quantity of forged notes had passed through the city, one raw spring, cut so cleanly that only a master could have made the plates. And when the men of the law went hunting for a master, they passed over the rich and the protected, and came upon one who was honest and poor and had no friend of any weight. They found in his workshop a plate. He swore upon his soul he had never cut, and 3 men willing to swear that he had. His hand was too good. That was the whole of the case against him. He was broken in a month and dead before the year was out. Of no illness the doctors would name, unless a man may die of a broken heart, which his daughter came in time to believe he had. Narissa had stood in the court and heard him say, in a voice she had never once heard him use, that he had never in his life cut a false line. She believed him. She believed him still and always would. But the certainty of a daughter is not a thing the law will weigh. No one asked her for it, and no one would have written it down if she had offered it. By the last week of that first hard winter, Narissa Fenmore had come to the very floor of her life. The little money was gone. She had sold her mother's ring and her books and her warm cloak for a thinner one and the difference in coin. Poverty, she had learned, was not one great misfortune but 1,000 small subtractions, each taking a little more of what had made her herself. One thing only, she had sworn never to give up. It was a flat case of dark wood holding her father's engraving tools, the burins and fine points worn to the very shape of his hand. She had carried it through every mean lodging of 2 years. It was the last of him left in the world, and very nearly the last of her. On the morning this account begins, she was carrying that case through the snow to a dealer 2 streets off, because the rent was owed and there was nothing else to sell. She stopped once on the way, not to find her courage, which was long spent, but to be sure her hands were steady before she sold her father's hands. Steady hands were the one inheritance left her, and she would not give those up in the same hour as all the rest. She never did sell them. Her fingers were on the latch of the dealer's door when a voice behind her spoke her name, her whole name, the ruined one, and did not falter in the speaking of it. A man stood at the mouth of the little street, elderly and sober, in good, plain black, with the still patient look of a person who has spent his life waiting in other men's halls. He asked, in the flat, courteous way of a man discharging an errand, whether she was Miss Fenmore, daughter of the late Ambrose Fenmore. She said that she was, and braced for whatever unkindness came so politely dressed, for in 2 years nothing had reached her under that name but unkindness of one shape or another. He gave her a letter instead. His name, he said, was Peveril, and he had spent 3 days seeking her through a city that did not care to admit it knew where she was. She opened it there in the cold, her fingers gone clumsy. It was not a demand, and it was not a cruelty. It was the offer of a place. She was wanted as companion and reader to a lady of high rank in the far north, a dowager duchess who had worn out her patience with the young women sent to her, and wished for one who could read a page well and keep silent when silence was wanted. The wages were £30 by the year, with her board, and a room with a fire, and a candle of her own, and the journey north provided. There was, in short, a place for her in the world, and food and warmth, and a door that opened rather than shut. Narissa read it twice and a third time, and still the words would not settle into any sense she dared trust. She looked up at the patient man. "You know my name," she said. "You have spoken it twice. You know whose daughter I am." "I do, Miss Fenmore." "Then you know there is not a decent house in the kingdom that will have me. Why should any house send a man 3 days into the worst streets of London for the one name that empties a room the moment it is spoken? There is some mistake or some cruelty I am too tired to see the shape of." Mr. Peveril looked at her with an expression she could not read. "There is no mistake," he said. "You were asked for by name and by no other. I was told to find Miss Fenmore, the engraver's daughter, and bring her north if she was willing. I was not told why. That is not my office to be told why. My office is to find people, and I have found you." "And whose house is it?" she asked. "That wants me when no other in England will." He told her the name of it, and something in Narissa went still and cold, for it was a name she knew, as the whole country knew it. It was the house of the Duke of Wexmoor. Everyone knew of the Duke of Wexmoor, which in that world passed for knowing him. He had gone to the war an ordinary young man and come home 3 years since altogether changed. Something had been done to him in the smoke of a battle over the sea. Some wound whose particulars nobody rightly had, and he had not been himself since. That was the gentle way of saying it, and few troubled to be gentle. They said he was proud beyond enduring, that he would pass a man he had dined with a score of times, and look clean through him, as through a window, and never own he had seen him in his life. They said he knew nobody, and valued nobody, and held the whole world beneath his regard. And some, dropping their voices, said it was no pride at all, that the wound had been to his head and left him broken in his wits, and that his family kept him at the cold far end of the country, and gave out that he was proud, because proud was the kinder word. What all agreed upon was that he was strange and alone, and no man any sensible creature would go near. No person of sense went seeking the company of the Duke of Wexmoor, and here was his household seeking hers. She stood in the falling snow with the letter in one hand and her father's tools in the other, and did the only thing left to a woman who has nothing. She chose the road that still had a little warmth at the end of it, and let the reason stay a riddle she was too frozen to solve. She would go north. But she carried the riddle the whole iron road with her, and made nothing of it. Why should the Duke of Wexmoor, who by every account knew no one, and wished to know no one, send a man 3 days into the gutters of London to find the one woman the whole city had agreed to forget? She reached Wistmere on the 4th evening, and every fear she had carried north proved to be the wrong one. She had built the house in her mind out of the whispers, a black ruin at the edge of the world, cold and shuttered and half-fallen, the only fit den for a man who looked through people as through glass. Instead, the coach brought her down a white fell in the last light to a great old house above a frozen tarn, its long rows of windows all alight and throwing bars of yellow across the snow, and the smell of wood smoke reached her before the wheels had stopped. It was the most living-looking house she had seen in 2 years, warm to the eye from the outside in, and that unsettled her more than any ruin could have, for she had known how to meet a ruin. She was taken in by the housekeeper, a round and kindly and perpetually worried woman named Mrs. Wren, who looked once at her, frozen gray with travel and holding her wooden case to her breast the way a child holds a doll, and wasted nothing on ceremony. She drew her indoors out of the wind, took the case from her hands as gently as if it were a thing of great price, and would not return it until Narissa was set down by a fire with something hot between her cold hands. Even then she waited for the reckoning, having learned in a hard school that no warmth was given for nothing. Chiefly, she waited for the name. Mrs. Wren asked it kindly, only to know what to call her. "Fenmore," said Narissa, and set her face to watch the good broad face across from her shut like all the others. It did not shut. Something crossed it, but not the old flinching. Very nearly the reverse. "Fenmore," the housekeeper said again, her worried eyes gone wide and soft. "Never any kin," she said to Fenmore the engraver, him that cut the great seal for the abbey, and the plate of the old duke that hangs in the long gallery yet. There was a man could set a whole living face in a space no bigger than a thumbnail, and leave you weeping over it. My own father kept a printing of his to the day he died." Narissa found she could not speak. In 2 years, not one living soul had spoken her father's name as though it named something fine. She had forgotten there were corners of the world where the word Fenmore called up not a courtroom, but a small marvel, a beautiful thing beautifully made. "I am his daughter," she managed. "I am Ambrose Fenmore's daughter." "Then you are heartily welcome under this roof," said Mrs. Wren, as if that were the whole of it, and somehow it was. Her room was small and warm, and on the table a branch of good wax candles had been left burning, more light spent freely for her comfort than she had let herself use in a 12-month. She thought of the single candle she had left unlit above the chandler's shop to spare it, and had to stand at the dark window a while until her eyes were her own again, She did not understand this house. She understood only that it was the first roof in 2 years, beneath which her own name had not been a wound, and the feeling was too large and came too near to tears. She was presented to the Dowager Duchess that evening, and the Dowager, at least, she could begin to make sense of. Honoria Dowager, Duchess of Wexmoor, was a very small, very straight-backed woman near 80, with a face like a folded map and dark eyes as quick as a wren's. Whatever speech her grandson had given up, she kept the whole of it in reserve herself. She began to talk the instant Nerissa entered and did not stop, of the hard road and the state of the tarn, and the sins of the companions who had come before and fled. It was a while before Nerissa saw that all this talk was made. For her sake, something easy to stand beneath while she thawed, so that she need answer nothing until the shaking had left her. "You will suit me," the Duchess said at the last, having studied her all evening beneath the flow of her own talk. "Your voice is low and easy on the ear, and you have not once tried to make me pity you, which the last one did before her bonnet was off." She set down her cup. "One thing only, I will tell you tonight, and then you are for your bed before you fall in the fire. You will meet my grandson tomorrow or whenever he decides to be met. And you are not to mind him, Nerissa Fenmore, when he looks at you as though he has never seen you in his life, and does not mean to trouble himself to see you now. He looks at all the world so. It is not the thing you will take it for, and I will thank you to remember it when the time comes." She met him the next morning, and understood nothing of what she saw. She had risen early, unable to sleep in so strange a bed, and gone down in the first gray light to find the library, which the Dowager had said she might use. She found it a long, high room that smelled of leather and cold ash, and she was standing before the shelves with something easing in her chest, for the first time in days. For a room full of books had always been her one sure refuge when she felt herself watched, and turned. A man stood in the doorway. She knew at once it was the Duke, for no one else in that house would stand so, tall and still and wholly at his ease, at dawn in his own house. He was perhaps 35, lean and hard-used, with the weather of foreign campaigns still in his skin and a soldier's economy in the way he held himself. His hair was dark and cut short, and had the first gray come early to it. But it was his eyes that held her, a light clear gray, and the strangeness of them was not coldness at all. They moved over her face with great care and seemed to gather nothing from it, the way a hand moves over a page of print it cannot read. He had come without a sound, and she would learn that he moved always. So with the trained quiet of a man who had passed years in places where noise was death. She waited for him to speak, or to know her, or to ask what she did in his library at such an hour. He did none of these. He looked at her the way a man looks at a stranger he has never seen and has no cause to see again, and there was no unkindness in it, and no warmth, only a clear, gray nothing, as though she were a chair or the light from the window. She remembered the Dowager's warning, and it held her steady. "Your Grace," she said and curtsied, "I am Nerissa Fenmore. I came to you last night. Her Grace your grandmother said I might use the library at this hour." And the moment she spoke, his face changed. It was not the look a man gives a face he knows. It was the look a man gives a voice he has waited a long time to hear. A pale eye sharpened and settled on her, and seemed for the first time truly to find her, though he had been gazing at her the whole while. "Fenmore," he said, in a voice low and little used, "you are Ambrose Fenmore's daughter." "I am," she said, and braced. From 2 years of habit for the name to do its work. It did its work, but not the old work. He was quiet a moment. Then he crossed the room, not toward her, but to the shelves at her side, and took down a book without once looking along the spines, the way a man takes a thing from a place he has known in the dark for years. He put it into her hands. The back of his hand, she saw, was crossed by an old white scar. "This was your father's favorite," he said. "He told me so, in this room, a long time ago. You may find his hand in the margins still." And then he was gone, as noiseless as he had come, and left her holding her father's book, with no more understanding of the man than before, and a great deal more to wonder at. She opened it. There in the margins, in a small exact hand, she would have known among 1,000, for it was the hand that had first taught her own, were her father's notes. He had stood in this room. The Duke had known him, had talked with him here of books. In the years before the ruin, it was the first solid thing she had been given since the letter in the snow, and it explained nothing. It only made the riddle larger. How had the Duke of Wexmoor come to know a poor engraver, and why, having known him, had he sent all the way to London for the ruined daughter, and why, above everything, had he looked at her until she spoke as though he had never in his life seen a living face? For a long while after she came to Wistmere, Nerissa was looking for the trap in it. 2 years of the world had trained her to it, to know that warmth held out to a woman in her state was alone, and that the gentlest hands were the ones that meant to collect the most in the end. So she went carefully those first weeks, taking the candles and the hot food and the freedom of the library, as a person takes ground that may give way beneath her, and waited to be told what it would cost. She was never told, because it cost nothing, and that emptied her of every defense she had, for she had made herself ready against a demand, and none ever came. She came instead slowly, and against her every instinct, to know the man, though he told her almost nothing of himself. He was not idle. That surprised her, for she had imagined a strange, proud duke brooding all day at a cold window. Alaric of Wexmoor worked quietly, and without cease at the running of a great estate and a great deal beyond it. Letters went out by the dozen, and money went with them, and Nerissa, with the run of the house and the long, slow days of a companion, began to see in glimpses where it went, and it was never where a proud man's money is supposed to go. She saw the first of it by chance, on a raw afternoon in her 3rd week when she walked down to the gatehouse on an errand of the dowager's. There was a man there she had seen about the place, an old soldier with a ruined face and eyes gone white and blind, who kept the gate and knew every wheel and every step that came to it. She had wondered how a blind man kept a gate. She understood it when the Duke came down the drive on foot, and the blind man straightened at the sound of him a good 20 yards off, and said, "Evening, Colonel," before the Duke had spoken a word. The Duke stopped and talked with him a while, easily, as he talked with no one in a drawing-room, and Nerissa, drawn back among the yews, understood 2 things at once: that the Duke had given a blind and faceless man a place and a wage and his own old rank to be called by, and that the 2 of them, the blind man and the man who could not hold the face, knew one another in the single way left to them both by the voice and the step, and were more at their ease in it than most men are with all their eyes about them. She began after that to see it everywhere. Once she had the trick of looking. She learned of a maimed sergeant of his old regiment set up with a small chandlery in the market town, his lease bought outright, so a man who had left his arm across the sea need not beg on a corner with his empty sleeve. She learned that every hard winter coal and meat were left, after dark, at the poorest doors of 3 parishes, and the poor there had for years given the thanks up to Providence, there being no other name attached. Always the same pains were taken to bury the source of it, so that the good was done and no man could point to the doer, and the one helped was spared even the small cold chain of being grateful to a face. She asked the dowager about it once, carefully. The old woman was quiet a while, her needle still in her hand. "He cannot abide to be thanked," she said at last. "And do not make the common mistake and call it modesty, for it is nothing so soft. Thanks must be given face to face, child, and faces are the country my grandson was turned out of. A roof he can give to a man he will never afterward be made to recognize, and that he can bear. What he cannot bear is the being thanked, the standing there while some grateful face he cannot read waits and waits for him to know it, and he never will. So he gives in the dark, where no one need stand before him, and be a stranger." She looked at Narissa with her quick dark eyes and said no more, and Narissa felt she had come again to the edge of a larger thing the old woman would not cross. It was in those same weeks that she came to the truth about his eyes. She was an engraver's daughter. She had been raised to read a face the way other children are raised, to read their letters, to see the whole of a person in the set of a mouth or the fall of an eyelid, for that had been her father's art, and half of it had been hers. And so she saw, sooner than most would have, the thing a whole county had spent 3 years calling pride. She saw that he never greeted a soul until they had spoken first. She saw that Mrs. Wren, without ever seeming to, spoke the name of each caller aloud as they entered a room. "Good evening, Mr. Hale. You are very good to come so far," and that the Duke took his cue from it and never moved before it. She saw him once return a long, grave courtesy to a footman he had taken for a guest, and go on without a flicker when the man answered, the way a person steps over a stair he has learned is not there. She saw that he knew her, Narissa, in the instant she spoke, and not 1 instant sooner, that her face was nothing to him, a blank gray page, until her voice turned it into a person he knew. And she understood, standing very still in the long gallery one gray afternoon, with the knowledge coming over her cold and entire, that the Duke of Wexmore could not know a face, not hers, not his grandmother's. Not, she thought with a pity that took her by the throat, his own in the glass. Whatever had been done to him in the smoke of that far battle had taken faces from him and left him all the rest, and he had taught himself to cross the world by voice and step, and the quiet help of a housekeeper who named his callers, and had let the world call it pride, because pride is a thing a man may wear with his head up, and the truth was not. It changed the whole of what she thought she knew of him. The cold stare that frightened a county was a man crossing a dark room with his hands held out. The silence at his own table was a man who did not know which guest had spoken. The cut acquaintance in the street was no contempt at all, but a man who could not tell one beloved face from a stranger's, and had chosen to be called proud rather than beg the world to keep announcing itself to him forever. She ought to have been warned by it. Instead, she found to her own unease that it moved her past speaking, and that she had begun to listen for his step at the reading hour with something she did not care to give a name. For there was a reading hour by then, and it had become, though neither of them had ever said so, the truest hour of her day. She read aloud to the Dowager each evening after dinner, in the long room with the lamps lit and the fells gone black in the windows, and the Duke had taken to coming in quietly near the end of it, to sit a little apart with his eyes closed and listen. She understood why he closed them. In the dark behind his own lids there were no faces to fail at, only the voice, and the voice he could hold and keep. She read the better for knowing he was there. And when the Dowager had nodded off in her chair, as she came to do earlier each night, and there was only the 2 of them, and the 1 lamp, and the book, he would open his eyes and they would talk, low, of what she had read. And those were the first hours of Narissa's life in which she forgot, wholly and for an hour together, to be ashamed of her own name. She would not let herself think what it meant, that a man was coming to know her by her voice alone, in a house where 2 women might sit in a single room, and he could not, to save his own life, have told which of them was which by looking. She would not think of it, but the thought was there and waiting, the way the cold waits outside a lit window, and a day would come when it walked in. As the winter drew in hard about the house, the reading hour grew into something Narissa had no name for, and did not look at too closely. They talked, now more than she read. End quote. He had a dry, exact turn of mind that came out only late, when the Dowager slept and the lamp had burned low, and it delighted her more than she would own. She had been reading him a famous sermon one night, much praised in its day, on the contentment proper to the poor, and she had stopped and said half to herself that it was a very fine thing, and that she wondered how many poor men the bishop who wrote it had ever sat down to supper with. The Duke, without opening his eyes, said that a bishop was a man paid handsomely to be certain the poor were content, and that few men are ever discontented with a task so easy. She laughed aloud, the first time she had laughed in that house, and told him it was an unkind thing to say, and very likely true, and asked whether he ever thought well of anybody at all. He considered it seldom, he said. It spares a great deal of disappointment. And then, after a silence, in a different voice, I am told I make one or two exceptions lately. He did not say who, and she did not ask, and she carried the sentence up to her cold room and lay a long while turning it over in the dark. She kept the book he had given her that first morning by her bed and read her father's notes in the margins until she knew them, and it was the nearest thing to a treasure she had owned in 2 years. It was the dowager who showed her the portrait, though she did not mean to show her all that came with it. They were walking the gallery one afternoon out of the cold, and the old woman stopped before the likeness of a young officer in scarlet fair, where the Duke was dark, laughing where the Duke was still, painted before he had ever seen a battle. That is Gideon, the dowager said, and her hard old voice went unlike itself. My younger grandson. He fell at the same field where Alaric took his hurt within a yard of him. The one came home, and the other did not, and the one who came home has never in my hearing spoken his brother's name aloud since, though I think he says it to himself the whole day long. When Nerissa looked at the laughing painted boy, and did not know what to say, and so said nothing, which was the right thing. There was a small likeness of him too. The dowager went on, lower. A little engraved thing Alaric carried through the whole war in his breast, over his heart the way a soldier will. It was on him at the last, at that field, and it took the same hurt he did, scored clean across, half spoiled. He keeps it yet. He cannot mend it, and he cannot part with it, and he cannot look at it, for the face on it is broken, now just as the face is broken in his memory. And between the two of them he has lost his brother's face entirely, the true one, the one that laughed. That is the cruelest thing the war did to him, child. Crueler than the rest, and I have never found the word to say to him about it. And I have had 3 years to look. She said no more, and they walked on. But Nerissa had gone very still inside, for the dowager had said, engraved, and a little later, passing back that way, Nerissa asked if she might see the small likeness, and the Duke, being asked directly by his grandmother, brought it that evening and laid it in Nerissa's hand without a word, and went and stood at the black window with his back to her while she looked. She knew the hand at once. She would have known it blind, by the depth of the line and the turn of the graver where it rounded a cheek, for it was the hand that had taught her own. Her father had set that laughing boy into the metal years ago with his whole loving skill, and her father was dead and disgraced, and the boy was dead, and the Duke stood at the window, unable to look at the one face that survived of 2, and it was her father's work, and no one living but she could mend it. She closed her hand about the little ruined thing, and felt the whole shape of a thing she did not yet dare to think, and gave it back, and said only that it was very fine work, and that whoever cut it had loved the doing of it. The Duke said, still to the window, that the man who cut it had been the finest of his craft in England, and had died believing himself a thief. Then he took it back and bade her good night, in a voice gone rough, and she went up and did not sleep at all. The trouble, when it came wearing a beautiful face. There was a great lady in that part of the country, a Miss Cassia Amberley, of a cool, unlined loveliness and a soft, cold way, who had made it her settled business to become the next Duchess of Wexmore. Her fortune was large and new, built by her late father, a famous man of business and charity, whose name was spoken with respect in every county he had never troubled to visit. She came to Westmere twice that winter, gracious and sure, looked through Nerissa as one looks through a chair set in one's way, set herself with great sweetness at the Duke, and did not once perceive that the man she meant to have could not tell her lovely face from the maids who brought the tea. It was on the second of these visits that a lady of her party, taking her cue from her hostess-to-be, said something over the tea about his grace, with a little laugh and a tap of one finger against her own temple. One did hear such sad things, she said. The silence, the strange blank stare. A man who would not know his oldest friend across a room. Her husband held, she said, that a man who behaved so had commonly something wrong in the upper works, and was best pitied and avoided. Narissa set down her cup. She had not meant to speak. She heard herself speak. "You are mistaken. And so is your husband," she said, into a suddenly attentive room. "I have lived beneath this roof a season. In that season I have seen a blind soldier given a gate to keep and a rank to be called by, a maimed man set up in an honest trade, and the poor of 3 parishes carried through the winters by a hand that takes the greatest care never to be seen or thanked for any of it. That is not the blank in a man's upper works, madam. That is a man who has decided that being seen to be good is worth nothing, and being good in the dark is worth everything, and has chosen the harder road of the two. I could wish there were more so afflicted, and fewer who tap their brows over the teacups. There was a silence you could have cut. Miss Amberley's lovely face went blank and still, and Narissa understood, her heart going hard, that she had made an enemy of the one woman in the county. It was most dangerous to have for one, and that she would say every word of it again. She did not know the Duke had heard. He heard in that house of everything. There was no card left for her, for he was not a man of cards. But at the reading hour that night, when the dowager slept, he said, out of a long quiet, that he understood she had spent his character rather freely over the tea that afternoon. She began to say she was sorry, and he said, "No, do not be sorry. No one has spoken for me in a room in 3 years." He was quiet again. Then he said, "I find I did not know how much I wanted it done until it was done," and he would not say another word all evening, but he did not close his eyes, and once, when she looked up from the page, she found the clear gray eyes open and resting on her, on the sound of her, with something in them that was not the blank at all. It was the dowager who told her the rest in the end, because she was old and had watched Narissa long enough to see that she was suffering, and had guessed the reason, and would not let a thing she could mend go unmended for the want of a broken confidence. It was a bright, hard morning in the deep of the winter, and the old woman had sent everyone else from the room. "You do not know why you are here," she said without any softening. "It is eating the life out of you, not knowing, and I have watched it do so for a month. I gave my grandson my word I would not tell you. I am past 80, and I have earned the right to break a word or two before I go, and I would rather you did a foolish thing out of knowing than a worse one out of ignorance. Sit and hear me, and then do as your knowing tells you." She told it plainly. Years before the war, when Alaric was young and open in a way she doubted Narissa could now imagine, his brother Gideon had been ordered abroad with his regiment, and Alaric, half mad with the fear of losing him, had gone to the finest engraver in England and commissioned a little likeness of the boy to carry, that he might have his brother's face by him wherever the fighting sent them. Both the engraver was Ambrose Fenmore. And when your father learned it was for a lad going to the war, the dowager said he would take no proper payment for it. He said a man should not be made to buy his brother's face. He cut it for the cost of the medal and a handshake, and he cut it better than anything he ever did for a bank or a lord, out of pure kindness to a frightened young man he had met 3 times. But then came the ruin, the forged notes, the too good hand, the 3 men who swore, and Alaric, still young, still believing the truth had only to be shouted to be heard, had gone to your father in his disgrace and taken his hand and told him that he did not believe one word of it, that he knew him for an honest man, and that he, Alaric, would not rest until the thing was proven and the name restored. He swore it. He gave your father his word, which was all a young man of 22 had to give, and then the dowager said, her voice going flat, the war took him within the 12 month before he could keep a word of it. His regiment was ordered out that same spring, and it took Gideon outright in an hour in front of him. And it took from Alaric the very faces he had gone to war to keep his brothers among them, with a blow to the head that no surgeon could undo. He came home with his brother dead, and his brother's face lost twice over, and a promise to a ruined man unkept, and something in him simply shut. He had believed once that speaking the truth aloud would serve, and the world had let an innocent man hang for a crime while he shouted it. And then the world had taken his brother and his sight of faces as well, and he decided, in whatever dark place a man decides such things, that he would trust nothing again that was only said, only seen, only promised, and would put his whole faith in things done quietly and made to last. Your father did not last the 2 years, and died before Alaric was ever whole enough to keep his word. That is, the grief under all his griefs. He could not save the father. So he has spent 3 years doing in the dark the one thing still left him. He has been quietly gathering the proof he could not gather at 22, the banker's records and the true accounts, building the case against the man who truly cut those plates and let your father carry it. And when he had learned that the daughter was destitute in London, refused at every door, he did the only thing a man may do without standing up in a room to be looked at. He sent for you. He brought you in out of the cold to keep the half of a promise he could still keep, while he worked in secret to keep the whole of it. Narissa sat very still, and the room seemed to go a long way off. "There," said the dowager more gently. "Now you know why the fire was laid before you asked and the candles left burning. It was not for a companion. It was for a debt, and for a promise, and for a dead man he loved a little and failed. And there is one thing more, and it is the hardest, and you had better have it from me than stumble on it yourself. The man who cut those plates, the man who ruined your father and died respected in his bed, was named Silas Amberley. And the handsome cold woman who comes here twice a winter, meaning to be my grandson's wife, is that same man's daughter, and she has built her whole loveliness and her whole fortune upon the good name of the very man who destroyed yours." Narissa went out into the cold gallery when it was done, and stood a long time before the laughing painted boy, and understood the whole architecture of her winter, and it was a bitter understanding. Every kindness of it had been real, and not one of it had been for her. The fire, the candles, the honored name, the book, the reading hour, all of it was a debt paid to her dead father, and a promise kept to a memory." Unquote. The man who had done all of it had never once imagined she might come to matter to him for her own sake, and she understood, sitting down at last on the cold gallery bench with her steady hands not steady at all, that she had come somewhere in that winter to want more than her cleared name, more than safety, more than anything left to want, that she should matter to him for her own sake, and that she never would, for he was only being kind to a debt with her face on it. That was the foolishness the dowager had seen. She had fallen, in the lit dark of the reading hour, wholly in love with a man who could not see her face and had never meant to. It was a bitter thing to a proud woman, and pride was nearly the last thing she owned. For a day and a night, she thought the only bearable course was to go, to take her knowing, and use it as the old woman had bid her, to stop taking a warmth that was an apology to a corpse, and keep the last of herself, and go into some gray manufacturing town where the name Fenmore meant nothing at all. She did not go, and the reason she did not go was the thing that changed everything after. For it was not weakness that kept her, and it was not only love, though love was in it. It was that she had seen in the reading hour and the gallery and the blind man's easy talk at the gate the whole shape of his wound. A man shut for 3 years in a silence of the eyes that no one had ever once tried to reach him through. And she found she could not leave a man so hurt when she was perhaps the single person living who had guessed the true shape of it and was not frightened by it. She had come to Wistmere to be saved. She stayed because she had begun to think she might be the one doing the saving, and that was worth more to a woman who had lost everything than any wage or any warm room, to have a thing to give that no other soul could give. There was a night that sealed it, though nothing was said, for the best of what passed between them was never said. A great storm came down off the fells near the turn of the year, and the thunder of it woke her, and going down for a book to read the fear away, she found the library dark, and the Duke in it, standing at the black streaming window with no candle, his hands pressed flat to his eyes. She understood. Storms had been the sound of that battle. In the dark and the noise, he was back in the smoke with his brother dying a yard off, and there was no face he could turn to for comfort, for there were no faces left him anywhere in the world. So she did the one thing she had to give. She did not touch him, and she did not light a candle. She sat down in the dark, and she began, quietly, to read aloud, though she could not see the page and made the most of it up, her voice going steady and level into the roar of the storm. And slowly in the dark, where his affliction was no affliction at all, for in the dark all men are faceless, and he was for once no worse off than any other, his breathing came back to him and his hands came down. They never spoke of it. But he came to the reading hour the next night and sat, for the first time not apart, but in the chair at her side. It was after that night that Narissa formed her secret purpose, and it grew in her all through the short dark days toward Christmas, until it was the whole of what she thought about. She would give him back his brother's face. It was the one thing in the world she had to give that no other living hand could give, and he had given her without ever meaning to, a warm room and an honored name, and the memory of her own worth. She would give him the thing his war had taken, and his grief could not mend. She would restore the little engraved likeness of Gideon, cut new and whole and laughing as her father had first cut it, so that the one true face he had lost should be given back into his hand on Christmas morning. She had her father's tools. She had the ruined miniature to work from, and the great painted likeness in the gallery to give her the face entire, and she had the hand, the steady, inherited hand that was the last of Ambrose Fenmore left in the world. What she had not was the means. A new plate of the right, fine metal, and gold to set it, the paying of the one old craftsman in the market town who still kept a furnace hot enough to strike it true, came to more money by far than a companion had, who was paid £30 by the year and had sent the most of her first quarter to a distant cousin who had once been kind. So she sold the one thing left that was wholly her own. Her hair was very long and very dark, and had been in the days when such things had been hers to be told, the one beauty anyone remarked in her. It fell past her waist when it was down, and it was the last of the girl she had been before the ruin, and she had kept it through everything as she had kept her father's tools, because a woman must keep something. She went into the town on a hard, bright morning, and she sold it to a wig-maker for what it would fetch, and stood very straight while the shears did their work, and did not let herself weep, for weeping cost too much, and she needed all she had. She came out into the cold shorn and light-headed and strange to herself, with the price of a man's lost brother in her purse, and she thought it a fair bargain, and thought only, walking home over the frozen ruts with her steady hands, that he would never know, and that this was right, for a gift that is asked to be seen is only half a gift. She worked at it in secret through December, at night, in an old still room off the kitchen where no one came. By the light of the good candles she no longer had despair. It was the finest and hardest work of her life, and her father was in every line of it. And when it was done she scarcely knew it from the thing he had cut himself, save that this Gideon was whole, and laughing, and undimmed. She set it in its little gold, and wrapped it in plain paper, and she wrote no name upon it, and on the morning of Christmas Eve she gave it into Mrs. Wren's keeping to be laid among the gifts, and asked only, her heart going hard, that it be given him from no one, from a well-wisher from the season. Mrs. Wren looked at her a long moment, with her kind, shrewd eyes, and said she would see to it, and asked no questions, being a woman who had guessed a great deal, and said none of it. The county came to Wistmere that Christmas as it had not come in years, For it was put about that the Duke had at last taken notice of Miss Amberley, and no one would miss the seeing of it. Cassia Amberley came in her finest, sure and gracious and lovely, and had brought the Duke a gift of great and showy cost, a fine hunter, led round to the door with a ribbon on its bridle for all to admire, and she stood near him the whole bright evening in her rich gown, close at his side, so that a man crossing the room saw the Duke of Wexmoor and the beautiful heiress standing as good as together, and drew the plain conclusion. The gifts were given out after the dinner in the long-lit drawing-room before them all. And when the small plain package with no name came to his hand, and he unwrapped it and saw what lay within, the whole hard, careful stillness of him broke, there, in front of the county. He stood with the little thing in his scarred hand, and he looked at it, at his brother's face, given back to him whole and laughing, after 3 years lost, and those who watched saw the proud, strange Duke of Wexmoor with tears, standing frank in his grey eyes. "Who," he said at last, not steadily, "who has done this? Who cut this? There is one hand in England could have cut this, and he is 3 years dead. Who has given me this?" And Cassia Amberley, quick and lovely and sure, saw in one bright instant that the gift had unmanned him, and that no name had been spoken with it, and seized the opening, as her father had taught her to seize such things, without a lie she could ever be charged with. She laid her gloved hand upon his arm and said, gently, warmly, that she was so very glad it had pleased him. She did not say she had done it. She did not need to say it. She let the moment and her nearness and her hand upon his arm say it for her, and the Duke, who could not see the face beside him, who knew only that a warm voice at his elbow had answered his question and a hand had come to rest on his sleeve in the very instant of his asking, turned to the woman he could not see and took her hand and thanked her brokenly, wholly for the greatest gift of his life. And Nerissa Fenmore stood 12 feet away in her plain grey gown, shorn and unregarded, and watched the man she loved pour out the whole of his gratitude into the hands of her father's destroyer's daughter for the gift she had bought with her hair and cut with her father's tools and given him out of the whole of her heart. There was nothing to say. She could not stand up in that bright room and cry out that it was hers, and shame him and shame herself, and be thought a jealous companion clutching at a duke. The season keeps no music for the gift that is not seen. She had known that on the first page of this, at a cold window above a chandler's shop, and she knew it now in a warm, bright room with the proof of it before her eyes, and it was worse by far to learn it the second time. She slipped out while they were all still looking at the Duke, and went up to her cold room, and only there, with the door shut, did she put her face into her 2 steady hands and weep, as she had not wept in 3 years. She resolved that night to go. It was ruin to stay, and not her ruin only, for she learned within the week that Cassia Amberley, secure now in her triumph and taking no chances with it, had begun very softly to see to it that the Wendwood companion, the forger's daughter, living unwed beneath an unmarried duke's roof, should be spoken of in every drawing-room in the county. It was an old and simple weapon, and it did its work. A companion so placed had only to be mentioned in the right sighing voice, and the mention did the rest. Within the fortnight, it was everywhere, and it was no longer a duke's charity but a scandal, and it was fixed to Nerissa exactly as the first disgrace had been fixed to her, and it would ruin in the end not her alone but the old woman who kept her and the man who had taken her in. She would not be the ruin of the 2 souls who had been kind to her. She would go and take the talk away with her, and leave them their peace, and it was the only gift she had left to give, and this one, at least, no one could take the credit of. But before she went, the thing turned, in a way she had not foreseen, and it turned upon the very gift, for the Duke could not let the miniature be. He carried it everywhere in those days, his brother's face come home, and he studied it as a man studies a miracle, and being a man who knew that hand of old, having watched it once cut the very first likeness for the cost of a handshake, a doubt began in him, and would not be quieted. He had thanked Cassia Amberley. But Cassia Amberley's hands, he knew for a certainty, could no more cut a line like that than fly, and no more could any living hand he knew of, for the one hand that could was dead and disgraced these 2 years. He sat late over it in the library, turning it in his scarred fingers, and the question in him grew and grew. There was one hand left in England that might have learned that stroke, learned it at the very bench where it was first taught. And that hand was under his own roof, and had grown suddenly and strangely shorn, and had said nothing, and was making arrangements, he had heard, to leave him. And the Duke of Wexmoor, sitting alone with his brother's restored face in his hand, began at last, 3 long months after the whole world of the reader would have to understand what he had done, and to whom, and what it had cost her, and he rose from his chair in the dead of the night like a man who has been struck. He came to her the next morning in the library, at the early reading hour that had been theirs, and he did not sit, and he did not close his eyes, and when she came in and said his name so that he would know her, he answered in a voice she had never heard from him, low and unsteady and stripped of all its careful stillness. "Do not say it is time you were gone," he said. "I know you mean to say it. I have heard you mean to go. I will not have it. Sit, and let me speak, for I have been 3 months a fool and a blind one, in more ways than the one the world knows of, and I find I can only say this once." She sat, because her legs would not hold her. "I thank the wrong woman," he said. "On Christmas night before them all, I took the greatest thing anyone has ever done for me in my life, and I laid my thanks for it at the feet of a person who had no more to do with it than the chair she stood by. I knew the moment I held it that only one hand in England could have cut that face, and that the hand was dead. I did not let myself think whose blood might carry the hand still. I did not let myself think because I was afraid to be right, for if I was right, it meant that you had done it, and I could not bear what that would mean, that you had given me my brother back, and I had turned and thanked another woman for it in front of the world." He stopped. His scarred hands were not steady. "But I am done being afraid to be right. It was you. Say it was you." "It was me," she said. He was quiet a long moment, and she saw the whole cost of the winter go across his still face. "You sold your hair," he said. "Mrs. Wren would not tell me at first, and then she would. You sold the last thing that was your own to buy the metal to give me back a face I had lost, and you signed no name to it, and you meant that I should never know, and you stood there 12 feet from me and watched me thank Cassia Amberley for it, and you said nothing, and you went upstairs, and then you decided to leave my house so quietly that I should keep my good name and my peace and never know what I had done to you. Have I the shape of it right?" She could not answer, and that was answer enough. "Then hear me," he said, and he came and knelt, this proud, strange Duke, on the cold floor before her chair, so that his unreadable eyes were below her own and level with her steady, unsteady hands. "I cannot see your face. You know that now, better than any living soul knows it. I have not seen a face in 3 years, not my grandmother's, not my brother's, not my own. But I want to tell you what I have instead, since I cannot have that. I have your voice, which I would know out of every voice on the earth and in the dark and at the end of my life. I have your mind, which told a roomful of the county that I was not mad but only kind, when no one had spoken a word for me in 3 years. I have the way you read into a storm to bring a broken man back out of it without ever once letting him see you had seen him break. I do not need your face, Nerissa. You are the one person I have ever known whom I did not need to see to know entirely, and I have been 3 months and 3 years too great a coward to say so." He stopped. "I let you believe you were a debt, because a debt I knew how to pay. And love, I had forgotten the way of it. Stopped being a debt the night of the storm, if I am honest. And it was never a debt at all by Christmas. Do not go. That is the whole of it. Do not go." She reached down then, and did the thing she had never done, and laid her steady hand against his hard-scarred cheek. The first time in the whole winter she had touched him, and at the touch he went still all over as a struck thing goes still. "I will not go," she said, "but there is a woman ruining my name through the whole county to have you, and she is the daughter of the man who ruined my father, and I will not be the thing that pulls this house down. So, you must let me fight it my own way, or help me fight it yours." "Mine," he said, rising. "It is time I fought a thing in the open. I have been 3 years learning that a thing done in the dark is safe, and it is a coward's lesson. And I have unlearned it this winter, watching you give the best thing you had in the dark and take a wound for it in the light. There is a worse thing than standing up in a room to be looked at and mocked, which I swore at 22 I would never do again. It is sitting down in the dark and letting the wrong go on because standing up is hard. I am done sitting down." The great assembly of the county was held, as it was held every year, at the turning of the old year into the new, in the long rooms of the assembly house in the county town, and everyone came to it who was anyone for 30 miles. That year they came burning with the tale of the forger's daughter, and the strange duke and the beautiful heiress who had all but won him, and Cassia Amberley came at the very height of her power. Certain the thing was as good as done. Her rival fled, or about to flee, the whole board hers. She had built her certainty, as her father had built his fortune, upon a thing safely buried in a man who would never speak in a public room. For everyone knew the Duke of Wexmoor did not speak in public rooms, could not, would sit at the edge as he always sat, and let the tide of talk carry the girl away. She had built it, in short, upon his silence, which was the surest seeming thing in the north of England. They were all there to see her crowned, and Narissa came too, on the dowager's arm, shorn and plain and straight-backed, and stood in the cold, clear space that opened around a disgraced woman as around a thing that might be catching, and bore it, for she had borne it before. And across the bright room, Cassia Amberley smiled her pleasant cold smile and waited for the evening to finish its work, and then the Duke of Wexmoor crossed the room. They made way for him as they always made way, thinking he went to some private corner, and he did not go to a corner. He came and took his place at Narissa Fenmore's side, in the cold ring of empty floor, so that the emptiness now held a duke, and the cost of keeping it there suddenly fell due. And then he turned and faced the room, and he did the thing not one soul in that county had seen him do in 3 years, or thought him able to do. He spoke aloud to all of them, and his voice, rough at the first word and steadying after, carried down the long room into a silence that dropped like a cut sheet. "You must forgive me," said the Duke of Wexmoor, "if I am clumsy at this. I am out of the habit of speaking in rooms like this one, and I will tell you now the truth of why, which you have made a great deal of these 3 years, and never once had right. It is not pride, it is not madness. A blow to the head at the war took from me the seeing of faces, all faces, every face on the earth, so that I have not known one of you by sight since I came home, nor my own grandmother, nor my own self in the glass. That is the whole of my great pride and my great madness. I have let you name it what you liked because a man may live called proud, and I did not choose to be pitied. He let the stir of it go through the room and pass. I tell you now, because I have been taught this winter, by a better person than myself, that there is a worse thing than being looked at and mocked for the truth. It is holding a truth in the dark, because the light is hard. He drew from his coat a packet of papers and held it up, and the room went wholly still. 3 years and more I have gathered what is in my hand tonight. A little more than 2 years ago, a man was destroyed in this country for a crime he did not do. His name was Ambrose Fenmore, the finest engraver England has had in our lifetimes, an honest man without a friend of weight, and forged notes were laid to his hand because his hand was too fine to be believed innocent, and he was ruined, and it broke him, and he did not long survive it, believing himself disgraced. He did not cut those plates. I knew him. I knew he did not, and I know. For it is here in my hand, in the bank's own record and in his own letters, who did. The man who cut those plates and let Ambrose Fenmore carry the blame to his grave, and who lived out his days, honored and charitable and mourned, was Sir Silas Amberley. The name fell into the room like a stone into a still pool, and every face in it, though he could see none of them, turned slowly toward the beautiful woman, standing alone now in the middle of the floor, with her smooth smile gone at last entirely from her face. "I have held this 2 years," the Duke went on, "and did not use it, because the man was dead and beyond my reach, and I am not in the business of hanging the dead, and I judged that to tear the whole thing open would harm his innocent daughter more than let it lie." His voice hardened. "I was wrong in that, as I have been wrong in a great deal. Ambrose Fenmore's name will be cleared in the proper courts this spring, with these papers, whatever it costs the living who have grown fat upon his grave. And one thing more, I will say, and then I am done, and you may make of me what you please. On Christmas night I was given back by a hand I could not see the engraved likeness of my brother Gideon, who fell at the same field where I was wounded, the one true face I had lost in all the world, cut new and whole by the one hand left in England with the skill and the love to do it. I thank the wrong woman for it, being blind, as you know me now to be. I will not be blind to it any longer. It was given me by Ambrose Fenmore's daughter, who sold her own hair to buy the gold for it, and cut it with her dead father's tools, and asked that I should never know, and stood in my house and watched me thank another for the gift of her whole heart, and never said a word." He turned in the ringing silence toward Narissa, and though he could not see her, he found her, by the sound of her breath, or the place where the silence was warmest. "That is the woman I mean to marry," he said, "if she will still have a blind fool who thanked the wrong hand, not the heiress, the engraver's daughter, the one who gave in the dark." There was a silence then, worse than any noise, and in the middle of it Cassia Amberley, her father's name broken open before all the people who mattered, and no gracious sigh left that could cover it, gathered the poor rags of her dignity, and went out alone through a crowd that parted from her the way crowds had parted all winter from Narissa. The doors of that county closed behind her one by one in the weeks that followed, exactly as they had closed on the woman she had tried to bury, and there was no triumph in it that Narissa could find, only the old sad justice of a buried thing come up at last into the light. They cleared her father's name, that spring, in the dry proper forms, in a quiet room and not a loud one, for the loud part was done. Narissa held the paper of it in the library at the lamp-lighting hour with the Duke beside her, and read the cold words that gave her back the thing taken from her father before ever it was taken from her, and she wept, and he did not this once keep any silence, but put his arm about her and let her weep, and said nothing, because, for once, nothing needed saying. "He did not live to see it," she said when she could speak. "That is the whole grief of it. He died believing his honest life had come to nothing, and his daughter was left with a poisoned name, and no soul in the world who believed him." "He knew," said the Duke. "It was the first she had heard of it. Before he died, I went to him. I could not clear him then. I had not the proof, nor the years, but I went to him, an unknown young man, and I took his hand, and I told him I knew he was innocent, and that I believed him, and that I would not rest until it was proven, however long it took. I could give him nothing then but my word, and I had learned by then how little a word of mine was worth in the world, but I gave it to him. He knew, Narissa. At the end, he knew that one soul of weight believed him. It was not his name back, nor his life. But he did not die thinking no one believed him. I made certain of that much in the days when it was still the only thing I had the power to do." He asked her. In the end, in the library, where a blind man had first put her father's book into her hands, and he asked it aloud, not with any gift and not on his knees this time, but plainly, standing, in his rough relearned voice, and she saw what the plainness cost him and loved him the more for it. "I have given you back everything that was taken," he said. "Your name, your father's name, your place in a world I am not sure is worth the having. You are free now. You need nothing from me." I made very sure of that before I let myself ask you this, for I would not have you take me out of need or gratitude, or because you had nowhere else to go. You have somewhere else to go now. You have the whole world back, so I can ask you cleanly. He paused, and it cost him. I have been alone inside my own blindness 3 years and did not know it was loneliness until you filled it with your voice. Stay, not as my grandmother's companion, not as a debt, not because you must. Stay because you would. Marry me, Narissa, and be the one face I never needed to see. I will spend my life making it right that I thanked the wrong hand. And Narissa Fenmore, who had come north with everything she owned in one small wooden case and no future in the world, stood in a library where a silent blind man had first shown her a kindness he could not account for, and made the choice that was wholly her own now, freely, out of no need and no fear. "I kept the book," she said, "the one you gave me the first morning. It has been by my bed the whole winter, and I read my father's hand in the margins every night before I understood why I could not sleep without it. I think I loved you before I knew I loved you, if you take my meaning." She reached up and laid her hand once more against his scarred cheek. "Yes, Alaric, I will marry you. And I warn you, I have grown fond of the reading hour, and I mean to keep it to the end of our lives, for I have learned that there is a knowing deeper than the seeing of faces, and you and I came to it in the dark, and I would not trade it now for all the eyes in England." She was quiet a moment. "You gave me back my father's name, but you gave me a better thing first, before ever the name. On the first night, when you laid a fire and lit candles for a stranger whose name emptied rooms and asked nothing, and let a kindness be only a kindness, I had lost the belief that such a thing could be. It was the worst thing I lost, worse than the name, and you gave it back to me before you knew me, before it could be anything but what it was. That is the man I am marrying, not only the Duke, who broke his silence in a bright room, though I love him too. The blind one, who lit the candles. They were married at Wistmere in the early summer, quietly, for neither of them cared for grandeur, and the Dowager Duchess sat in the front pew looking as though she had arranged the entire business, which she maintained to her considerable age she substantially had. The doors of the county that had shut upon the bride were all open now, and their owners came and were forgiven more or less, and Narissa found she did not much care for them, having learned exactly what such doors were worth. There was a habit they kept in the long, good years after that no one who did not know the story could understand. Every evening at the lighting of the lamps, the Duke and Duchess of Wexmore went to the long room, and she read to him a while, and then they talked, and then for a time they did not speak at all. And it was in that easy dark where the seeing of faces was no matter that they were most entirely at home. He kept his brother's face by him to the end of his days, the little engraved thing she had cut for him, and he came in time to be able to look at it and smile. Her hair grew back long and dark, and once, years on, she offered in fun to let it grow to her waist again so that he might sell it and buy himself something, and he said gravely that he had no need, for he had already been given by that hair the only thing he had ever wanted, and would not risk the market a second time. On the wall of the library, framed among the books, she hung the little ruined miniature, the first one, the one the war had scored across. Beside the whole one she had cut to mend it, the broken face and the healed one side by side, and no one who did not know the story could ever say why a duchess should frame in honor so spoiled a scrap of metal. But Narissa knew why. Every respectable house in England had refused her, one after another, in the coldest winter of her life, and had been right to by the only measure they had. And one man who could not see a single face had heard her voice in the dark, and taken her in, and let her give him in the end the one gift the world had no music for, the gift that is not seen. It was the whole of her happiness in the end, and it had begun with a fire laid and candles lit for a stranger, by a man who could not have known her face across a room to save his life, and never once, in all the good years, needed to.